afternoon, and welcome to Miss Walker's Afternoon Story Time. We are going to continue reading How to Train Your Dragon. We started this, what was it, Evan, 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And we have discovered that this book is not quite like the movie. Many of you all may have seen the movie How to Train Your Dragon. But we have discovered that the hiccup and the storyline, the plot in this book is a little different from the movie. At this point, Hiccup and the group of boys who were training to become part of their tribe have run into some trouble. Hiccup is the they failed their test and were all supposed to be banished from the tribes because of Toothless irritating their dragons. But when they woke up the next morning, they found great sea dragons had come to stay on their beaches. And now they have two giant sea dragons, one on each side of the island. And Hiccup is the only one that speaks Dragonese. So he was sent down to talk to the dragon and find out if they came in peace or in war. And they said they came in peace, but they were going to eat them anyway. So they have come up with a plan. The boys have this group of boys that is supposed to join the tribe that failed the initiation. They have come out with a plan of what they're going to do to save their people and their tribes from these two giant sea dragons. So that's what we're picking up. It's chapter 14, The Fiendishly Clever Plan. Oh, I forgot, guys. I will start while I am reading. I will pull up the book so you guys can look at the pictures because this book comes with, I've got this ebook and it's got some drawings that go with it. And I know you guys have been enjoying those drawings. So I'm going to pull that up so you all can see that. Here we go. Let me change my screen. Here we go. The Fiendishly Clever Plan. The dragons protested a bit, but the boys yelled to get them in line, except for Toothless, who absolutely refused to join in. You must be joking, sneered the little dragon. Oh, and by the way, all of their dragons are little, like size of dogs. I refuse to go anywhere near the sea dragons, Gigantus Maximus. Those are dangerous. I will stay here and watch you all. Hiccup coaxed and bribed and threatened in vain. You see, said Snoutlout, the useless, he's talking about Hiccup, can't even get his own dragon to carry out his pathetic plan. And this is the person you're banking on to get us out of this mess. Ugh, said Dog's Breath, dub. Let me try that sentence again. Ugh, said Dog's Breath, the Durbrain. This Oh, shut up, Snoutlout chorused the rest of the boys. Hiccup sighed and gave up. Okay, then. Toothless, you just stay here and miss all the fun. Now I want everybody to go to the gull's nesting place and collect as many birds' feathers as you can for the feather bombs. Bird feathers, scoffed Snoutlout. This wimp thinks you can find an animal like that with bird feathers. Cold steel is the only language a creature like that will understand. Dragons have a tendency to asthma, explained Hiccup. It's all the fire breathing they do. The smoke gets in their lungs. So you think a monster is going to die from asthma right then with a few feather bombs? Why not feed him fried herring and see if he drops dead from a heart attack in 20 years or so? Sneered Snoutlout. No, said Hiccup patiently. The feather bombs are just going to make him very confused, so he won't kill anybody on the way. Snoutlout, Thiggery, I'm going to need to coach Fireworm and Killer in what they have to say, continued Hiccup. I'm not putting my dragon at risk in this crazy plan, said Snoutlout. Oh, yes, you are, hissed Thiggery through gritted teeth, brandishing a massive fist at Snoutlout. The guy was such a pain, Hiccup. I don't know how you put up with him. Listen, Snout Features, by some miracle you have got yourself a reasonable dragon, and get that dragon to do what Hiccup wants, or it will give me so much pleasure to personally boot you all the way to Porpoise Point and back again. Okay, said Snoutlock crossly. "You don't blame me when we all get barbecued because of this useless, mad idea." Hiccup supervised the making of feather bombs. The boys gathered armfuls of feathers from the gull's nesting place. Then they burgered material from an item of material they could find. God, go, go, Google Toad's nappies, Gobbler's pajamas, Magoon's meathead's tent, anything they could get their hands on. The grown ups were too busy consulting among themselves to take any notice. Snout cheered up a bit because he could show off his superior skill at burglary. He managed to steal Vagabond's knickers right off him while he was standing in a huddle discussing the action plan. Vagabond didn't even notice when he reached a hairy hand down to absently minded Scratch. He was too busy talking to Bigger and the better methods of yelling. The boys then wrapped the feathers up in the material so they could fly out. Then the bomb was dropped. Each team of 10 boys was armed with about 100 of these feather bombs wrapped in a great parcel made out of an old sail. Hiccup led the hooligans towards the long beach, and Thuggery took the meatheads to Unlandable Cove. A thin column of boys were excitedly chattering as they set off behind Hiccup. Warthog and Clueless were dragging their sail in the rear. The dragons were circling and diving a couple of feet above their heads. The Vikings, practically fearless, had been bred to be soldiers, so even Hiccup and Fishlegs had a surge of excitement as they thought of the battle to come. But as soon as the monster came into sight, the boys and their dragons instantly dropped to their tummies and squirmed forward. Hearts beating hard, it was impossible that anything could be that big. Hiccup led them near as he dared to the edge of the cliff surrounding Long Beach. They looked down at the terrible creature soaring in front of them. His nostrils alone were as big as 6-foot front doors, and the stench reeking out of them made it difficult for the boys to breathe. Warthog, who had always had a delicate stomach, threw up disgustingly in the heather. Hiccup, Fishlegs, and Clueless unwrapped the feather bombs and gave each one to a boy. The boys called their dragons as softly as they could, and each put a feather bomb in their dragon's mouth. They stood up on the edge of the cliff and with their dragons on their outstretched arms. Let me catch up to the picture here. This took about the same amount of bravery as it might take you to leap off a mountain at 1,000 feet. Even with the monster fast asleep, the natural reaction was to keep hidden in the bracken. Hiccup tried not to breathe in. He lifted his arms to give the command to begin. "Go!" whispered Hiccup. "Go!" yelled the boys, and the 10 dragons flew up and circled around the vast green head. Now, it was green death and hailed. Hiccup shouted, "Now!" The dragons let go of the feather bombs. The green death took a breath that was half air and half feathers. He woke up with a gigantic sneeze. As he shuddered and coughed, Fireworm, who had been treading air above his right ear, gave a speech which went something like this, but a lot more irritating. "Greetings, O sea dragon Peleus Manus, from my father, the terror of the seas. He is feeling like feasting on barbarians, and if you will get out of his way, he will feast on you. Swim away, little sea slug, and you'll be safe. But stay on this island, and you will feel the sharpness of his claws and the fierceness of his fire." So there we have the image of the dragons dropping the feather bombs. Fireworm leads the way at Operation Sneeze Attack. The giant monster tried to laugh sarcastically and cough at the same time. This is virtually impossible. The feather went down the wrong way, making him cough even more. Then Firework bit him on the nose. It must have felt like a flea bite, but the monster was outraged. Through streaming eyes, Green Death made a swipe at the irritating dragon flea and missed. One giant claw tore down the cliff face instead. 9 other dragons by this time had returned to collect more feather bombs from the boys on the cliffs. Now, yelled Hiccup, with a second split second timing there, let their bombs fly. They hit their target of Green Death's nostrils, and he collapsed with coughing again. You cannot win, puny worm, crowded Fireworm. Wiggle back to the sea where you belong and let my master have his supper. Now Death was really cross. He bounded lopsidedly after Fireworm, trying to bat away his irritating little speck of a dragon with his claws. But Green Death had the same sort of difficulty catching Fireworm as you might have if you tried to catch a firefly with your bare hands. Dragons are better than humans at this sort of game, but the Green Death kept missing because his eyes were streaming so much. Missed again, sneered Fireworm, enjoying herself hugely. She flapped just out of reach of Green Death's claws. The Green Death made another leap towards her, and Fireworm flew around the corners of the cliff, steering the monster in the direction of the unlandable cove. Hiccup and the boys ran as fast as they could, but they hadn't a hope of keeping up. Running through the feather was not like running through knee it was like running through knee deep molasses, and they kept disappearing up to their knees in the bog. As Fireworm and the monster got further and further ahead in their race along the shoreline, it took longer and longer for the other dragons to fly back to the boys and return with more feather bombs. The military commanders among you will recognize the kind of problems that ensue when the supply line is no longer reach the forces at the front. Eventually, it was taking so long to reload, there came a moment when there were no feathers tickling Green Death's nostrils, and his eyes stopped streaming, and suddenly he could see the maddening fireworm pinpoint clear. The Green Death made a lightning reflex swipe at the red dragon and caught her with one gigantic claw. But it was lucky for Fireworm. At that very moment, the purple death came crashing around the corner and struck Green Death heavily in the stomach. His grip loosened on Fireworm for a second, and she flew off, panting with relief. Green Death sat down heavily in the sea and fought for breath. The purple death did the same. Chapter 15. The battle at Death's Headland. Let's see how long this chapter is, guys. Oh, we can do this one. Here we go. Chapter 15. While Hiccup and his team had been enraging Green Death, Thiggery and his team had been infuriating Purple Death. The two monsters ran smack into one another, and they met at the corner of Death's Headland. One of Fireworm's ring was broken in two places, and from her experience in Green Death's grip, so she barely flew back and made her final speech into his ear as he sat gasping for air in the shallows. Here he is, shouted Fireworm, my master, the purple horror, who will tear you limb from limb and spit out your toenails. And Fireworm flew away lopsided as fast as she could, with one wing trailing behind her. Green Death was having a bad day. Ordinarily, Sea Dragonus Gigantus Maximus would not dream of attacking another animal of the same breed. They avoid fighting each other because they know they are so heavily armed that battle risks ending in the death of both of them. However, Green Death had been attacked and jeered by a minuscule creature who had inflamed and outraged his vanity. This creature, who seemed to think he was tougher than Green Death himself, had struck him heavily in the chest. Green Death wasn't thinking too hard. He leaped at Purple Death with his talons outstretched, breathing great bursts of fire which lit up the landscape all around like lightning. The ground and the sea shook in great earthquakes as the two gigantic monsters lunged crazily at each other, swearing the most unrepeatable oaths of dragonese. Green Death's foot completely destroyed Wrecker's wreath in one blow. Purple Death's wings caused great landslides to come tumbling down from Headland's cliffs. Now that their job was done, the Viking boys were running as fast as they could, eyes popping in terror in case one of the dragons survived the fight. Every now and then they looked back to see how the battle was going. With ghastly, eerie cries, the dragons slashed and bit and tore pieces from each other. The sea dragon is the most well-defended creature that has lived on this planet. Its skin is over 3 feet thick in places and so encrusted with shells and barnacles that it almost has the effect of armor. It also is well-armed creature that it has lived on the planet with razor-sharp claws and teeth that rip open its iron crust as if it were made out of paper. Now both dragons had terrible wounds, and their green lifeblood was pouring from them. Green death gripped purple death around the neck with deadly throat chucker grip. Purple death hugged green death around the chest with a deathly breath quencher hug. Neither would let go. The grip of the dragon is a terrible thing. They reminded Hiccup of a picture of one of his father's shields of two dragons forming a perfect circle as they ate each other, each with the tail in its mouth. The dragons thrashed around wildly in the surf, grabbing and choking, their eyes popping and their tails causing such tidal waves that the boys were soaked, even though they were scrambling away from the headland as fast as they could. Finally, with some last heaving shudders and grim gurgles, both mighty beasts lay still in the water. There was silence. The boys stopped running. They stood gasping for breath, watching the motionless beasts with dread. The boys' dragons were flying some way ahead of the boys, also turned and hung in the air. The terrible creatures didn't move. They waited 2 long minutes. Waves lapped gently over the motionless bodies. They're dead, Hickory said at last. The boys started laughing, rather hysterically now that the terror was over. Well done, Hiccup. Hickory slapped Hiccup on the back. Hickory was looking worried. He squinted his eyes and strained to hear. I can't hear anything, said Hiccup anxiously. You can't hear anything because they're dead, Hiccup. 3 cheers for Hiccup, Thuggery said joyfully. Halfway through the boys' cheering, Fireworm let out a terrible noise. Dessert, she screamed. Dessert, dessert. The head of the corpse of Green Death was slowly lifting up and turning in their direction. Oh, no, said Hiccup. And we will stop right there to pick up on Wednesday with chapter 16. Chapter 16 is called The Fiendishly Clever Plan That Goes Wrong. So apparently, Hiccup's plan for stopping these two giant sea dragons has gone horribly wrong. So tune in Wednesday to see how it has gone wrong and what the boys are going to do to save their village.